everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And today, we are going to be previewing the much-awaited matchup, as all K-State matchups are for those who listen to this show, between your Kansas State Wildcats and the Troy Trojans. As always, with all the previews we do, we're going to be going over their 2022 season and stats, starting with the offensive side of the ball, then moving to defensive, then what they returned and what they lost from the last year. Connor has you for the first part, which is their offensive numbers and their record from the previous year.
So last year they had pretty much a banner year. They went 12-2, 7-1 in conference. Really fantastic year for Troy. Rushing yards, they had just over 2,000 and 2,058, only averaging 3.3 yards per attempt. They had 21 rushing touchdowns. They had exactly 3,400 passing yards at 8.48 yards per attempt, 62.6% completion percentage through the air, 20 touchdowns to 15 interceptions. They converted exactly 1/3 of their third downs. And then in the red zone, they scored 81.2% of the time, and they scored touchdowns 54.2% of the time. They allowed 46 sacks, had 25.57 points per game, and a total of 358 points for. What this says to me, Ace, is that their offense wasn't really great.
No, it wasn't, but they were weirdly a passing offense last year, which is interesting given the general team philosophy that we'll talk about on the defensive side of the ball if you don't have anything else to say about the offensive side.
No, other than just they were below average, didn't really take care of the ball that well, and didn't score as much as you'd expect for a 12-win team. Yeah, that's really the only notable stuff about their offense.
Yep. And then on the defensive side of the ball, which is really where they made their bread and butter last year, they were only giving up an average of 17.14 points per game for a total of 240 points total. They gave up 296 passing yards, 14 passing touchdowns, 2,089 rushing yards for 15 rushing touchdowns, a red zone scoring percentage of 78%, and a touchdown percentage of 56.1%. 13 picks, and this is not a joke, according to their own website, 25 fumbles forced. I'm not sure if I believe them wholly, but that's what their website says. 41 total sacks and a turnover differential of +4. So as you can tell, their defense was quite the strength, especially in terms of preventing scores in the red zone. So you'd think with a defense like this, they're one of those more traditional teams. You know, they sort of grind out the game by running the ball. That's where the offensive stats are sort of interesting in their relationship because they were a passing offense. But we'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about their returns and losses, which, speaking of, Connor, you have what they return/add from last year.
Yep, so they bring back Gunnar Watson, who was their QB all of last year, their leading passer. They bring back Kamani Vidal, running back. He was their leading rusher last year, and he had a big week last week. We'll talk more about that later. TJ Jackson, their sack leader, defensive end. Richard Jubinor, bandit. He was their second leader in sack. Reddy Stewart at corner. He led the team in interceptions. Del Pettis, their starting safety. And then they added Asa Martin, a running back transfer from Memphis, which was a coup from Florida. And then they added Reggie Bracey, a corner transfer from Iowa.
Yeah, so they're returning a lot of their production last year, especially on the offensive side of the ball in the rushing game. But then you look at what they lost from last year, and it is not insignificant at all. In fact, it's quite significant. They lost Jake Andrews, their starting center. He ended up being drafted in the 4th round of the NFL draft. They lose DK Billingsley to graduation after he was their second leading rusher. They lose their leading receiver and inarguably their best receiver in Tej Johnson. He ended up transferring to Oregon. Their second leading receiver, Ray J. Johnson, ended up graduating. Carlton Marshall was their leading tackler, who ended up graduating. Craig Slocum was their second leading tackler, who ended up graduating. Will Cholo was the nose tackle and third leader in sacks, and they lost their other starting safety in TJ Harris, as well as their kicker. So a lot of what made their receiving game so deadly is now gone.
Yeah, so it remains to be seen if they'll be able to really figure that out over the course of the year. We've seen one game so far from them, and there's certainly some things we can draw from that. So I guess we can go ahead and get into the schedule now.
Yeah. So the only game they've played is up against Stephen F. Austin. They ended up winning by a score of 48-30, which is a convincing victory, but this was supposed to be a defensive team, and they just gave up 30 to Stephen F. Austin. That does not bode very well for them. But outside of the schedule and that score, I'll take the top half of basically the stats from that one game, and then you can take everything from that down. All right. So obviously they won their first game, and they won it with the ground game. 342 rushing yards at 8.3 per attempt, 198 passing yards at 9 per attempt, 4 passing touchdowns to 1 pick, only 1 rushing touchdown, but I think this is the kicker, a 58.33 repeating third down percentage, which is offensive third down percentage, which they were converting a lot of their third down opportunities because they were pretty short.
Yeah, and then defensively, they allowed a third down percentage of 30.77. Then points per game, of course, is 48. Their total points for is 48. Points against is 30. They have a +1 turnover differential right now, and they're yet to log a sack on the year. But yeah, that's the stats so far. Just one game of stats. But yeah, definitely an unusual stat line, especially for a team that liked to throw the ball last year with some really electric passing. And then so far this year, that defense that really helped lead them to success last year did not show up against their first FCS opponent.
Yeah, and I think that's a cause for concern for Troy. So that's all the numbers out of the way. Now we can actually start talking about the scouting report for the team themselves. But before we get into the scouting report, firstly, this episode, as every episode, is brought to you by the Aggieville Alleycats merch store at aggievillealleycats.myspreadshirt.com, where you can find such designs as the classic neon Alleycats, established Alleycats, among several others. But also, alongside that, here's a quick word from the other sponsor of today's episode. And we are back on this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats, where we are previewing the matchup up against the Troy Trojans. And now we are going to be discussing the in-depth scouting report of Troy, what we saw on film in their one game. So we'll just start off firstly with their play calling and personnel in reverse order. They're a bit more of a traditional offense than we're used to, at least in terms of personnel. They use a lot more 12 personnel, which is one back, 2 tight ends from shotgun or pistol. They don't operate under center, so that's the sort of caveat. They operate a lot from pistol, and their run-pass split is really tilted from the first game because of how well the rushing game is working. I don't expect this to stand in our game. They only pass 36% of the time as opposed to 64% of the run. And their passing game is a lot of quicker stuff, like quick fades, slants, RPOs, stuff like that. Hopefully, they will not be running 8,300 screen passes because I don't want to watch that again, just selfishly. It has nothing to do with what K-State's ability to stop those screen passes. It would just be really annoying. But Connor, you have the rest of the play calling tendencies here.
Yep. In the running game, they will run pretty much any area of the field, but they are going to run up the middle the most. But they're most effective running off of their guards with a pretty ridiculous average of 16 yards per carry there right now. This is yet another skewed statistic, they call them in the biz, that will likely not stand. They do run a lot of play action, 34.8% of dropbacks. Then again, screens, We saw South Dakota, or not South Dakota,
SEMO.
SEMO run that against us a lot. So hopefully we're able to adjust and stay on top of the quick stuff. And then motion is a pretty significant part of their playbook, both passing and running. A lot of qualities that they will just pick out of a lot of modern college offense. Nothing that hasn't been seen before by K-State, but they're good at what they do. So
yeah, the way that I would describe it is they take a lot of the traditional running game that we've seen in college football's past, and they mix it with a lot of more modern motion principles. In a lot of ways, it's not too dissimilar to what Courtney Messingham tried to do in execution. The only difference is that, Troy actually runs RPOs and doesn't rely wholly on option routes. I have opinions on that, but before we get too deep into that, we can start talking about their individual players, starting off with the man under center or in pistol/shotgun, and that is Gunnar Watson, coming in with a 74.9 PFF grade, 77 in the passing game, and a 55.2 in the running game. I'm going to say right now, he may be one of the most annoying players that we're going to play this year. And it's not because he's like this insane world beater. It's because he's not. He's not that random G5 quarterback that you get in your NCAA like dynasties where he just suddenly turns into the greatest quarterback in history whenever he plays you. Gunnar Watson is a solid quarterback. He probably can work his way into getting drafted mid-rounds or late. And a lot of that is because of his ability to be a very quick decision maker. He just doesn't hesitate whenever he's throwing. He's very much see ball, hit ball, go. Like every time. And he's so consistent with that. That's why he's so difficult to sack. However, it can work against him. He moves too quickly at times, can force some passes, leading to some bad picks, which is why he didn't have a great turnover ratio last year, 20 to 15. He almost tries to work himself too quickly at times, which, while it can lead to some turnovers, it also means you're not sacking him. And what makes that worse is he has a pretty quick release, and he's just not very easy to sack because he's so quick with everything in the passing game. And Troy has sort of built the offense around that fact. They know that Gunnar Watson can process things really quickly in the short game, or when he can throw a go ball, on one-on-one coverage. And they're just going to do that. He has a decent enough arm to go with the release as well. It's not a world-beating arm. Mobility, no. He's a non-threat if you have a player within 12 yards of him whenever he starts to scramble. But on the flip side of that, his pocket awareness is really, really good. And he's really good at creating room for himself. And he's not going to dumbly walk himself into sacks. Which, given his offensive line, which we'll talk about in a minute, very good trait to have. But like I said earlier, he may be one of the most annoying players we see this entire year. It would not wholly surprise me if K-State only ended up with 1 or 2 sacks this game, just by virtue of how quickly the offense operates with Gunnar Watson.
Yeah, but getting into running back, I talked a little bit about him earlier, Kamani Vidal, 89.2 PFF grade through one game this year, 85.7 in the run. He's a smaller running back, and his speed is not fantastic. He's able to get chased down by linebackers with regularity, and that's FCS Stephen F. Austin linebackers. That's not even taking into account, an Asa Newsome or Desmond Purnell. His vision is not fantastic, but he is fairly elusive. He can be pretty shifty. He is good at lateral movement. He reaches his top speed quickly. It's just that his top speed isn't very fast. So he definitely has some good qualities as a running back. His contact balance is really, really good. And if you don't make a strong tackle on him, he will probably bounce off of it. And he knows where to position his feet. But he, all in all, is a solid running back. Probably not going to put up 250 yards against us like he did against Stephen F. Austin.
No.
If he did, that would be a pretty serious problem, I think.
Yeah.
But he's containable, but that doesn't mean that he's a bad running back. I do think that he's worse than SEMO's running back, who we did hold to -6 passing or rushing yards. So we'll have to wait and see with Vidal. I still like him. He has some intriguing film. We're gonna have to take him really seriously because he can burn us, and he will burn us for just lots of 5, 6, 7 yard gains if we let him. And so we're gonna have to find ways to contain him and keep him in front.
Yeah. And the receivers, honestly, are just so meh. Like, there's nothing really to say about all of the receivers except for one. So, like, I'll just mention the guys who ended up leading in snaps in the first game. Number 4, Marcus Rogers, a 54.6 PFF grade, 53.7 in the past. He really thinks he's him. Like, he really, truly, in his heart of heart, I think he believes that he's, like, the best contested catch receiver in the country. He's not. No. He thinks that he has the ball-winning wide receiver that can just catch back shoulder balls, and he's clearly molded his game around that fact. No. He's an average receiver at that and just about below average at everything else. He kind of reminds me a lot of SEMO receivers, probably a little faster, though, but that's not hard. Deshaun Stoudemire, he was a complete non-factor in the game despite getting like second most snaps. Take that information for what you will. I'll actually let you take both the final receiver and the tight end.
Yeah, Jabre Barber had the highest PFF grade, 65.7 and a 65.8 in the pass game. He's working the slot, and he's good at that. He's a slot guy through and through. Probably understands his role better than any of the other receivers that we saw, which probably contributes to him grading a bit higher and being a bit more effective than the other guys, because the other guys seem to not really get their position on the team. But Jabre Barber does get it. He knows who he is, so we'll have to look out for him in the slot. And then at tight end / fullback, they have number 89, Clayton Allendijk, 69.9 PFF grade. Not great in the past, 51.6 grade, but his run blocking grade was quite good at 75.1. He's a very good run blocker. We saw multiple instances of this in film, and he helps their stretch run game significantly. He hopefully will not be much of a factor in the passing game. He could be good for maybe a little hook route over the middle or something like that. Mm-hmm. But he's not going to be a burner. If he is, then we should be embarrassed. But he's still a good player, and he's going to allow them to do some things that they want to do in the run game if we aren't able to find ways to neutralize him.
Yeah, and they also have another tight end. He's their more receiving option. The name escapes me. That also kind of tells you what he's like. He's a fine, like, G5 tight end who can operate within this offense, which does a lot of quick game. So he's going to be running like stick routes. But now the offensive line, I'll take the left side of the offensive line. You can take center to right. Center, and the reason I'm taking 2, he's taking 3, is because the left side is much. Well, I'm sorry, Connor. I'm taking the funny side.
That's okay.
The offensive line is giving up pressure on 26.1% of dropbacks, and as a unit, they are horrible against the blitz. Absolutely terrible. But not a lot of that is the left tackle's fault. Number 77, Derek Graham. He had a 60.4 PFF grade, but an 80.8 pass block grade, 62.2 run block. He's in the unfortunate position of having to be right next to the left guard. We'll get there in a minute. He's clearly trying to do enough pass blocking work for the entire left side. And to his credit, he's not really that bad at it. Like, he's actually a pretty solid blindside protecting tackle. With that said, you can abuse his inside shoulder because he's not going to get any help on that side. But outside of that, he's a pretty solid, like, traditional like blindside tackle. You know, his run blocking is just fine. Like, he's not going to do very well if he's like head up against someone like a stronger defensive end, paging basically all of our defensive ends, Khalil Duke especially. Or maybe, putting Toby on him, that would be gross. But like, their left tackle's fine. He's actually kind of solid. I could see him being like a late day 3 pick as like a developmental guy, because he has all the tools to be that guy. All right, so now on to the worst offensive lineman that I have ever evaluated. That is not a joke. I remember it used to be that Texas Tech left tackle that got carried into the end zone by Felix in the 2021 game. We have a new champion, and that is left guard number 67, Grant Betts. I'll just read the 2 PFF grades that make it seem like he's just average, which is a 59.4 PFF grade, and then a 64.8 in the running game. Connor, do you mind reading that middle number there and just read it loud and clear for the record here?
Okay, I will. His pass blocking grade on PFF is a 17.4.
That is without a doubt the worst PFF grade I have ever seen in anything. And honestly, it shows up on film, because he is, without a doubt, like I said earlier, one of the worst offensive linemen, if not the worst offensive lineman I have ever evaluated. He is worse than FCS offensive linemen that we have evaluated. And the part that is worst about him is that he's just awful at picking up blitzers. I mentioned earlier that the entire offensive line doesn't do very well picking up blitzes. It very well might just be Grant Betts, and everyone else is just screwed around him. Because I've seen, like, normally if a blitzer approaches the line of scrimmage, you know, before the snap, they can make an adjustment to it, like they know what to do there. He doesn't. He just lets them go. Like, if you give him any sort of conflict whatsoever, he doesn't know what to do, and he's blocking no one. And honestly, it can get kind of funny. But outside of that, he just doesn't do anything well. Like, I don't want to dumpster on the guy. He's not going to listen to this episode, and if he does, I'm not apologizing for my evaluation, but I'm sorry if it hurt you. But yeah, he is. Honestly, I think there's a world where K-State literally modifies their front to put more people on the left guard in passing downs by virtue of him just not getting it. He just does not understand. But now that is out of the way, Connor, you have the right side of the offensive line. I'm sorry that there's not as much to say about them.
Oh, it's no worries. At center, you have number 66, Eli Russ. Overall, PFF grade is 62. His pass blocks is 60.3, and his run block is a 60.9. So ever so slightly above average, to the point where it is just average. One of his biggest issues is keeping his head up during his first punch against the nose tackle. And it's pretty obvious because it looks like he's headbutting the nose tackle, which I don't think is a very good strategy for who's oftentimes the smallest offensive lineman, aka the center. So that's really the only major note on Eli Russ. At right guard, number 74, Daniel King, 63.6 overall grade, a 64.5 run block, and pass block is pretty good at 84.7. He's a good guard, and that's the only note. That's it.
Yeah, he's a good guard.
And then at right tackle, number 63, you have Carson Burt, who has a overall PFF grade of 55.9, a pass block grade of 83.6, and a run block grade of 49.4. And he's really good blocking against power rushers, and you're going to have to go pretty much completely around him, which I think could be a job for one Nate Matlick. But he's a solid enough pass blocker, especially for a right tackle. Run blocking, at least if you believe in PFF, leaves something to be desired. But all in all, that whole middle and right side of their offensive line is mostly unremarkable.
Yeah, like you have unremarkable but solid. Eli Russ, by the way, is actually an Oklahoma State transfer a few years ago, I believe. But that is their offense. Now we can talk a little bit about their defense. In terms of coverage, they play a lot of off-zone stuff. They're a big fan of rotating the strong safety down into a hook zone in cover 3. So playing a lot of what's called cover 3 buzz, which is buzzing the safety down to a hook zone. It's stupid. They just come up with phrases sometimes. Like cover 3 Mabel. Cover 3 Mabel's stupid, by the way, but it's also like probably the objectively best defense. Okay, we're getting in the weeds. In terms of the front, they play a modified over front on the D-line where the backside edge is lined up as a wide player. Sometimes work in a little bit of cub with a nose tackle who's like really far off the ball for some reason. Like it's almost like he's playing a walked up linebacker, but with a hand in the dirt. He's like a good foot and a half off the line. I don't get it, but okay. Even fewer times, mostly on passing downs, they walk up 3 linebackers to one side of the formation and kick the linemen out to the other, sort of trying to overload either side and do a lot of blitz bail stuff from that. But they also rotate quite a bit, especially at defensive end and linebacker. But Connor, you have both the interior defensive line and the edge players in this case.
All right, so on the interior, you have number 95, Luis Medina. His PFF grade's a 74.2. Then his run defense, 71.7. Pass rush, 67.5. He's fairly versatile. He doesn't really ever play as a true edge. He bounces around the interior and sometimes goes head up on a tackle. He isn't really a major tackle for loss threat. But he is fairly decent at holding his ground, and will get a stop after maybe a yard or no gain. And you can rotate him away from the play, and he is he will give up his leverage fairly easily just because he is wanting to maintain his gap. And then number 4, Buda Jones on the interior defensive line. 63.5 PFF grade, a 66.9 run defense grade, and a 56.2 pass rushing grade. His first step is pretty good, but he doesn't use his hands very effectively. He treats his shoulder like it's a battering ram, and if you're able to get your hands on him, he isn't able to really do much past the initial pop. And when he does try and use his hands, he ducks his head to try and get a punch in. And he just doesn't have the natural pop to his hands, so he just takes an extra step or two to generate the momentum. So he's not a fantastic interior defensive lineman. You're going to win the rep pretty much immediately most of the time against him, but he still has some capabilities of doing more. But then we can move on to the edge. Number 6, Javon Solomon. He's got a 57.2 PFF grade, 61.5 run defense grade, and a 61.6 pass rushing grade. He's the better of the 2 edge players when it comes to backside pursuit, and his bend around the edge is pretty good. He has a solid outside rip, which can be said for both of these edge rushers. Which, speaking of, number 9, Richard Gibnor. He is the other edge rusher, 59.5 PFF, 64.1 run defense, and 59.5 pass rush. He will try and bump the quarterback, even on a running play when the ball is gone. Just kind of a psychological warfare tactic from Richard. And his pursuit isn't fantastic, but his duck and rip that he occasionally uses is really good. But if he tries to get inside, he's not going to get much of anything done. And he does occasionally drop into coverage, but but it's mostly just because of what they actually do in their cover 3 schemes. So he's a little more versatile than Javon Solomon, maybe the slightly better of the 2, at least in things he's capable of, although Solomon's going to be better tracking down a running back from the back.
Yeah. Yep, that's how I would describe them, I fear. So now we can move on to the linebacking room, led by number 10, Jaden McDonald, a 66.4 PFF grade, 72.2 run defense, 54.8 tackling, and a 60.7 coverage grade. He's generally all right at meeting blocks and running alongside the play. He's not shedding many blocks, but he's stopping their advance, which sometimes is all you can really ask your linebacker to do when you're running like three-man surfaces, as they occasionally do, or even sometimes cub surfaces that they run. But his biggest weakness is probably his general athleticism. If I had to describe this linebacking room, it is the anti-Tulane linebacking room from last year, which, if you remember, the big thing on them was they were insane athletes who were just asked to be missiles no matter where they went. Troy's linebacking room is sort of the inverse, in where they are not as great of athletes, but they're pretty technically sound and they know what they're doing in a more general sense. Like they're trying to follow like the rules of the defense rather than see ball, go kill, which, you know, you can debate the merits of that because Tulane's defense was better. But then you have the second linebacker, that is number 12, Terry Thomas, a 61.4 PFF grade, 59.7 run defense, 42.2 tackling, 62.1 in coverage. I actually kind of think that he's the better of the two linebackers, despite the PFF grades disagreeing. But he does have the issue of being one of many linebackers in college football who always takes the first step forward before he takes any step backwards. And if you've ever played outfield, like during Pee Wee baseball, they will always tell you to try and take steps backwards because it's easier to move forwards than backwards. So you want to be safe just in case. But that sort of makes his weaknesses stretch runs and play actions, especially bootlegs. I would imagine so. I don't think Stephen F. Austin ran too many bootlegs against him. But he's a pretty decent athlete, and where he leverages this most is finding holes whenever he's blitzing. He's a really, really solid blitzer, a really heady blitzer that more often than not, he's not going to meet you. He's just going to know where the hole is going to develop just based off of like that half-second look of where the defensive line starts going. So he's most likely to be the free rusher, but I prefer him over Jaden McDonald. McDonald's probably the better tackler. I'd give Terry Thomas the edge just about everywhere else. But both are pretty solid G5 linebackers. They're not living up to what their linebackers last year did, because their linebackers last year were a big reason why the defense was so great. But Connor, you have their three cornerbacks.
Yep. So first we have number 2, Reddy Stewart, 70.4 on PFF, a 64.1 run defense grade, really nice tackle grade at 78.8, and then a 70.3 for his coverage grade. He's pretty patient when he's playing in press. He doesn't take many false steps. In off coverage, he does sometimes give up more ground than he necessarily needs to. And he's good at flipping his hips and getting vertical a bit early, and leaves underneath stuff on the table. But he's all in all a good quality corner. Made some nice plays against Stephen F. Austin at various times, especially run defense. He made a couple of impressive stops. But then number 14, Caleb Ransaw, is the next corner here, 59.8 on PFF, 53.5 run defense, 58.4 tackling grade, and a 61.9 coverage grade. Whenever he tries to bump a receiver, he seemingly is leaning backwards, and that's something that could be taken advantage of by a receiver to just bait him pretty much in that regard. And he also does really like doing the DB dive at an ankle tackle.
The DB dive. I've never heard it called that, but I'm really appreciative that I now have a phrase to use for this. Thank you.
Yeah, he is good at that. Well, I shouldn't say good, but he does do it a lot. And he even does it against receivers, even though that kind of started as something for corners to tackle tight ends and not get injured while doing it. And then your last one, you have number 11, O'Shea Fletcher. He's a 70.1 PFF grade, another 70.1 in the run defense, an 80.3 tackle grade, and then a 68.3 coverage grade. He's pretty quick on his feet. He can bounce between guys in the zone pretty quickly. He is good at sinking his hips to flip his momentum. He has the opposite problem of Seward, where he knows his hips are quick enough to where he can't wait to flip his hips vertically. So he could be easier to beat deep if you're able to catch him just a little bit off guard. You may have enough time to just kind of blow past him if you time a route correctly and you're able to catch him in a lull where he thinks he's comfortable.
Yeah. It actually is really interesting because they have two corners that are basically like opposite skill sets. You have Reddy Stewart, who's like really not wanting, like his number one priority is not get beat vertically. And then you have O'Shea Fletcher, who, you know, he knows that he's good enough, so he'll try and jump you a little bit, which is funny because I think Reddy Stewart was the one with the interception last week. But the corner, I'd say their defensive back room, specifically their top two corners and their strong safety, which we'll talk about in a minute, definitely the strength of the team. Which, speaking of, now we can talk about their safety, starting with strong safety number 1, Del Pettis, who has an 87 PFF grade, 79.3 run defense, 83.5 tackle, 82.5 coverage grade. Yeah, he's awesome. He's a genuinely great safety and almost certainly the best player on the team. He just doesn't have weaknesses. Like, normally, we kind of go into games saying like, oh, what can we find to exploit here? Which is why a lot of times it kind of sound we're coming off negative in our previews, which we don't intend to. It's just here's their weaknesses, so look for them to be exploited. Del Pettis is not the kind of guy that just has weaknesses. He doesn't panic and start to shuffle backwards too early. He looks for people to cover, not grass and zone coverage, which when you're a buzz safety, yeah. He's very quick on the trigger and doesn't waste any steps in getting to his man, whether it be in man coverage or whether it's a rally to the ball pursuit scenario. He's a big hitter. Like, he just doesn't have weaknesses. The only thing that you may be able to say is he may not be like the greatest athlete in the world, but honestly, Del Pettis reminds me a lot. He reminds me a lot of. He is not. Let me clarify. He reminds me a lot of Jalen Petrie back for those Baylor defenses, where Jalen Petrie was called the star defender for a reason. Like, he just didn't make mistakes, and he didn't have any glaring weaknesses. Like, he just reminds me a lot of like a G5 version of Jalen Petrie from Baylor. But their free safety, there's a lot less to say on. Keyshawn Swanson, number 3, 66.5 PFF grade, 62 run defense, 55.7 tackle, 67.4 in coverage. He doesn't have the elite center fielding speeds that most teams really want, especially when they're running that cover 3. But he was also well aware of that fact. So he's trying to get himself moving backwards pretty quickly when he's in deep zones. I wouldn't expect him to be much help in the box. He's a more true safety that you hope ends up being not close to the line. So like a more true center field free safety where, you know, he's either the last line of defense for a ball carrier who's already been worn down or that he just needs to slow down rather than like a true strong safety. But that is the scouting report on Troy's entire offense, or at least their starters. They do rotate a lot at receiver, defensive end, and linebacker. Honestly, a lot of the players are interchangeable. But now we can talk about the stories to watch going into the game. Connor, what is the first story that you are looking to watch for?
Well, the first one is, does Troy's defensive quality that they had as a team last year return after a really bad performance against a Stephen F. Austin team that could be characterized as okay at best?
You see, this is difficult because I don't know. Because a lot of their defense last year was based on the play of their two linebackers, who I don't understand how they didn't. I imagine they were probably NFL camp bodies. But a lot of it was them and Del Pettis. and the only person left is Del Pettis. So I don't know if K-State is the team that you would really look for them to bounce back against. And I think that matchup against Stephen F. Austin revealed a lot of their problems. And granted, some of those were self-inflicted wounds, like first game jitters up against like first team of the year. Everyone's going to have them. But even their head coach said, we're going to get blown out by K-State if we have anything close to a performance like they had against Stephen F. Austin. I would say that they would regress to the mean just because I still think that the coaching is there. But I don't think that they're going to suddenly turn into the Troy defense from last year.
Yeah, I do agree. They just don't have the personnel for it, I don't think. They are still going to be a fine defense. I think they probably won't be as bad as they were against Stephen F. Austin. But again, that's still going to look different because I think that we're a much better opponent than Stephen F. Austin. So, they may play better as a unit and still give up more points. In fact, they probably will give up more points than they did against Stephen F. Austin. But, there's not going to be a magical return to form for this Troy defense.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. The next one refers to K-State. Can K-State's offensive line have a bounce-back game, especially at the right tackle position after a disappointing performance against SEMO in like an FCS squad?
I'm hoping. I want to see different people succeed on the offensive line. I'm not convinced yet. I guess it does depend who we run at that position. But I'm not 100% convinced that we're going to have, again, like Troy's defense magically isn't going to become great. I don't know if we can expect right tackle to magically become good for K-State before Duffy returns. So it may continue to be a liability, but at this point in time, I don't have super high expectations. And that's unfortunate because I was definitely hoping for more coming into the year. But I guess we'll have to just wait and see.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, like that, it is mostly just right tackle that concerns me. Okay, that concerns me that I didn't already know about, that I didn't know was already going to happen. Their edge players aren't bad. Like, they're solid edge players. Like, they're better than the ones we just faced off against SEMO. And during the beginning of the game, SEMO they could do just about anything if they tried to take the inside on specifically the right side of the line. But again, I think it may be a case of sort of regression to the mean. I'm hopeful for regression to the mean where, the right tackle play sort of reaches a sort of homeostasis where it's just okay or at least unnoticeable. I will take unnoticeable. It would be a sort of improvement from the beginning of the game at the beginning last year. I would accept that.
Yeah. So moving on to the next story to watch going into this game. How well can K-State's defense contain Troy's running game after they had a huge game against Stephen F. Austin?
Well, most of their running game succeeded because of their blocking tight end running stretch plays. I don't think that their blocking tight end is going to be able to contain Brendan Mott. I don't think they can contain Khalid Duke. I don't think they can contain Des Purnell. I don't think Daniel Green will have too much trouble. And even if he does get hands on one of them, the other guys are going to be right behind him. And their offensive line, especially on that left side, is not very good. The right side of the line is solid, but they still have their weaknesses and they can get blown back by people stronger than them. And they don't really know how to adjust to that, which I think is why they want to call a lot of those outside zone calls where the onus is on the running back to find the hole. The problem is, I don't think there will be a hole. I think that just the way that K-State's defense will operate, I don't want to say that they'll hold them to like under 75, but I don't think that the Troy running game has a very, very good day, knock on wood.
Knock on wood indeed. I guess based off of just a single week of film and statistics, this will be an unstoppable force against a movable object, meaning the Troy rushing game versus the K-State rushing defense. I think K-State should be able to mostly contain Troy's running game for similar reasons as they did, I guess, against Hess. We did way better against the SEMO running game than I anticipated that we would. So if we can perform similarly against Troy, fill running lanes early, and also create an early lead and create early urgency in their offense and force them to maybe take some more time-consuming pass plays to help negate some of that quick strike play calling that they have. But I'm not super worried about the containment of their running game, at least not right now.
No, I wouldn't be either. Next question. Can K-State's defense play fast enough to counter Watson's quick processing and release?
I think that they can. Some of that is going to come down to the offense as well. We're going to need to put them in a situation where they can't just take the short and underneath easy stuff. I think that we're going to have to put them in a position to where they're going to have to stretch the field more and hold on to the ball longer than they want to. They really don't want to do that because they know that it won't be too difficult for us to get pressure on their quarterback, especially if we rush from the correct places. But I do think that we can do some to stop that. Their quick processing and release. But at the end of the day, you can only stop so much because there's a lot of options in the quick RPO, slant, and quick fade game. We're going to give up a few quick passes just like we did against SEMO, and that's okay as long as they don't amount to anything.
Yeah. If I were playing it, how I would play it is I would basically just do man coverage across the board. I would just play like cover one basically the entire game. Mix in a little bit of like cover zero, just creative blitzing. Because I know for a fact that the offensive line can't handle it. That gets into the next part. But I also watch like their receivers have a lot of trouble beating press. Like they just cannot get press, and Gunnar Watson works so quickly that he thinks like his best opportunity to like, oh, there's a guy having a go ball on the outside. There's press coverage. Well, may as well throw up a prayer. That's basically what he does. So I think that you can play a lot of press coverage in this game, and I think it'll work out pretty well. But I sort of touched on the answer to the next question. Does Kleinerman dial up a lot of blitzes given the offensive line's issues handling them? God, I hope so.
Yeah, that should be an easy one for everybody. We should absolutely be applying as much pressure as early and as often as we can to Troy, because it's clear from the film that their offensive line's communication skills are struggling at best, and we need to take advantage of that as much as possible and put their offensive line in uncomfortable spots and force their quarterback, Gunnar Watson, to make more and more too quick reads, because he loves to be fast, but we need to speed him up even more because the margin for error on some of these routes that he throws is not very high. So we need to find ways to make him uncomfortable and log a few sacks. And some of that's going to be from dialing up blitzes.
Yeah. You either need to speed him up or slow him down. I think because right now, I think it'd be easier to speed him up because I think he already borderline plays too fast. Like for the offense, like to develop, which is why he throws so many picks. But you have the last question before we get into projections.
Yep. So does K-State alter the front or game plan to attack the left side of Troy's offensive line?
God, I hope so.
Yeah, I think that we might. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if we don't, though. Just to keep our front the same. Maybe I imagine we still blitz that side more, and maybe try and get maybe Austin Moore or Daniel Green into a one-on-one with their left guard. I think that would be a unfortunate situation for their left guard. But I think that the linebackers should be able to have huge days if we scheme correctly against that offensive line, especially on that left side.
Yeah, I agree. So now we can talk about projected offensive and defensive MVPs. For offense, I'm actually going to go with DJ Giddens because I do have a lot of faith in the Troy secondary, not to fully contain the K-State passing game because I don't think they're that talented. But I do think that they do just enough to where I can't pick Will and I can't pick any receiver. So I'm actually going to go with DJ. I think DJ has the opportunity to have a big game behind. Like, I'm assuming that the offensive line returns back to at least decent, like 85% of what it was last season. And I think DJ has a massive game because of it. Because I don't think that the linebackers are good enough at tackling, nor do I think that they're quick enough to truly catch up to DJ, because DJ is not slow. The alternate pick, I think you couldn't go wrong with picking Trayshawn Ward either. I just think DJ Giddens got more snaps, so he just kind of got picked here by default.
Yeah, and I'm rolling with Will Howard. I still think that we're going to find a way to really expose the middle of their defense. Because, again, their linebacker play is not quality. So I think that we'll be able to find ways to get Ben Sinnott and Phillip Brooks heavily involved in this game. I think they could both have huge days and really take advantage of their linebackers and their kind of lack of athleticism. I think especially Ben Sinnott will kind of have a field day over the middle of the field, but that's going to result in Phillip Brooks and Will Howard Phillip Brooks and Ben Sinnott making Will Howard have a really great day, and that will probably open up other opportunities elsewhere. But I'll roll with Will Howard to help dissect that defense and open it up more than they want.
Yep. On the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with Daniel Green because I expect Daniel Green to be blitzing at the left guard, and I expect the left guard to be falling a lot or just not touching Daniel Green. I don't feel like you could go wrong with anyone in the front seven here, like, at all. I'm just going to pick Daniel Green because I think he's probably the best pure blitzer. Probably next to Toby Osunsanmi, but he's a reserve as of right now. If Toby O was a starter, Toby would be the easy pick for me.
Yeah, I'm rolling with Austin Moore. He'll be playing right in front of that left guard. I'm thinking that he'll get at least one sack in this upcoming game. I think he is likely going to have a field day against this left guard if we bring him on any blitzes in that position. I'm looking forward to seeing how we attack him because I think that we both have pretty much the same idea. We're just using different people to get there.
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued to see who they roll with.
Yep. So now finally the score projections. Now it is worth noting that K-State has played Troy before. They only scored 6 points, as in Troy did the first time they played. I do have them breaking the record for most points that Troy has ever scored against K-State, unfortunately. But I do have the Cats winning 38-10.
Yeah, but now we got K-State 49-13, just falling short of that 50-point mark that Colin Klein has really wanted to hit. It's attainable. I bet we do it sometime this year, but I have us coming up just short.
Yep. So do you have any final notes before we step away?
I do not.
All right. Well, if that's the case, thank you all for listening to this preview for the Troy game from the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us on just about every single social media and YouTube at Aggieville Alleycats. If you want to email the show, we are AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us more personally, I am at ACEdwards00.
I'm at Connor Baltazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store, AggievilleAlleycats.myspreadshirt.com, or you can just take a look at the link in the bio of our Twitter or in the bio of the show itself to get yourself some cool Alleycat merchandise. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast, where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.